Okay, I think I got cut off on that last one. George Washington, part 3. And actually, probably John Adams. Nobody's happy when John Jay gets back with this treaty. It makes way too many concessions to the British. It makes no provisions for the captured ships. It makes no provisions for the lost slaves. It grants 18 months for the British to move their military, and then it guarantees the British are allowed to continue the fur trade in our western frontiers, and they can leave as many soldiers as necessary to protect the fur trade, which essentially means they're not going to remove their military. The U.S. gets no benefit except an improved trade status, but the British inform us, if we catch you trading with the French again, then we go back to things just the way they were. So basically, Jay's treaty looks like we just signed an alliance treaty with the British. At least that's what the French are going to think as soon as they get a look at it. Now, Washington got the one thing he wanted. He wanted the British to recognize our independence. He wanted them to recognize that we were a nation that needed to be dealt with. Okay, so he sends a treaty to the Senate so that it can be ratified, and it does. It's ratified along Federalist, Republican models. Okay. However, the House is really upset because there's more Republicans in the House of Representatives, and they believe some of the measures in this treaty require financing, and so the House demands that it be able to vote on the treaty also because of these financial obligations. When the vote comes out, it passes by just 3 votes. Passes by just 3 votes, and Jay's treaty is ratified. Even in his addresses to the Congress and to the Senate, Alexander Hamilton tries to come in and defend the virtue of Jay's treaty, and even Alexander Hamilton can't come up with the right words because everybody knows that we're getting shafted in this treaty. Everybody knows it. Okay? The split in the House looks familiar. It's the same as the Hamilton-Jefferson split on economic policy, and it's the same as the Federalist-Republican split on French and British sort of ideas. Now, in the South, something happens that's going to stare Southerners to death. In 1791, a third of the island of Hispaniola is going to erupt in revolution. Okay, the eastern half of the island is Spanish, Santo Domingo. The western half is French, Saint Dominique. Okay, fighting will go on there for far more than a decade, and here's sort of how this thing boils out. In 1789, the white colonists start challenging the royal government officials in Haiti, okay, which is contemporary Haiti, in Saint Dominique. The French Revolution is in full swing back in France, and so now these Frenchmen are pushing the royal government in Saint Dominique to give them more freedoms and more liberties. Okay. In 1791, the free blacks start demanding equal rights in Saint Dominique, and quickly these plantation owners put down, they quell that kind of uprising. Almost immediately when they do that in 1791, it starts a revolt here in this area called Le Cap, right? It's a slave revolt. The slaves, basically, the only chance that you had was to gain your freedom and get your rights as a free man. But if even the free blacks in Saint Dominique will not be given equal rights, then what chance do we have? And the slaves rebel. The slaves rebel. Thousands of slaves rebel. In 1793, France, Spain, and English are all involved in trying to quell this rebellion in Saint Dominique. This is what needs to be noticed, though. 1793, that's when the British and the French are fighting each other. They are at war back home. So why would the French and the British, why would the British come to help put down a slave rebellion on a French sugar plantations? Because the British have sugar plantations also in the Caribbean. And so they can't have this rebellion leaking over into the other islands. The Spanish kind of provide a buffer between the British and the French. So this attempts to quell this rebellion is going to move in failure. Eventually, Toussaint Louverture, the slave who comes to the top to lead this rebellion, is going to make an alliance with the Spanish. He's going to sign a peace treaty with the Spanish, which tells the Spanish, if you will withdraw from the war, we will not push our soldiers beyond this line from Fort Dauphin straight down. And so none of us will come to Santo Domingo, and the Spanish will quit fighting in the conflict. As soon as the Spanish pull out, then that leaves the British and the French, who are at odds with each other, and eventually the British support for this movement ends. Finally, the French will lose in this area, and as far as I'm aware, I may be wrong, but as far as I'm aware, Haiti is the only free and independent republic that was created as a result of a slave rebellion. So, this conflict kills tens of thousands, right, with thousands of plantations being burnt during this time period. And so the big question is, so why does this scare Southerners? You can imagine that in the South. As a matter of fact, some of Thomas Jefferson's friends from France sent him letters, since slavery is so dangerous, why do you guys still persist in having slavery there in the United States? And Jefferson comes up with some plans and some ideas, but by and large, Jefferson, from this point on, from previously, has been attempting to find ways to eliminate the institution of slavery in the United States. He is the one who authored the Northwest Ordinance, which forbade the expansion of slavery into the Northwest Territory. Now, Federalists and Republicans, the election of 1796. This is John Adams. Now, Washington had tried to be above party politics. Adams and Jefferson are the two big contenders in this race. In 1793, Jefferson had resigned from Washington's cabinet because of the conflicts with Alexander Hamilton. With John Adams running for president, Hamilton goes back to New York because he knows he will find no place in an Adams administration. So he goes back to the state politics of New York. These Federalists and Republicans are going to nominate individuals. The Federalists will nominate Thomas Pinckney and John Adams as their two, and the Republicans will nominate Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. These two men will run as the Republicans. So those will be our four names, like I showed you in the Electoral College. When the Electoral College comes to vote, they write down two names on each ballot. They write down two names of the four on each ballot. Adams wins, which wasn't really a surprise for anybody. But what shocked everybody was Thomas Jefferson got the second number of votes, not Thomas Pinckney. So what happened is these electors voted for Jefferson as well as Adams, which makes Jefferson realize that he's got a chance at becoming president. So Thomas Jefferson will become the vice president, and John Adams will become the president. Now, France, as I mentioned earlier, France is going to get a hold of Jay's Treaty. And as far as the French are concerned, Jay's Treaty is nothing more than an alliance between the United States and Great Britain. And so the French privateers start attacking American ships. They do exactly what the British did. Over 300 ships will be attacked. 1796, 1797, France refuses to receive an American minister. They believe that because of this treaty, we have declared war on France, is what they think. C.C. Pinckney, who is the ambassador to France from the United States, cannot get an audience with the French Foreign Minister, Talleyrand. The Federalists start murmuring war. They say, let's go to war, we should attack the French, we should do it. Because the Federalists are always pro-British. They're always pro-British. Adams, however, Adams wants to negotiate, at least negotiate backed by military muscle. Okay? So even though Adams wants to negotiate, because Adams' reasoning is this: when the British started attacking our ships, we didn't go to war with the British. We went to get a treaty. And so Adams says the same thing that we are going to do is going to be get a treaty with the French. Okay? So what Adams wants to do is he wants to basically build naval frigates. He allows the Congress to build 12 naval frigates. A naval frigate is a large gunboat that can serve double duty. You can take half of the guns out and use it as a merchant ship, right? A cargo ship. He also improves coastal defenses. What's going to happen during the War of 1812 when the British fleet is defeated in Baltimore Harbor? It will be because of Fort McHenry, one of the forts that John Adams has built. Adams' philosophy is that if the British and the French are willing to attack our ships just off our coasts, what's going to stop them from attacking our coastal cities? And so Adams starts having these coastal defenses being built during his administration, as well as these 12 naval frigates. Now, he sends 3 additional men to France. Okay, the French refuse to receive them, and then after these 3 men arrive, Talleyrand, the French foreign minister, is going to send 3 French agents to discuss what's going on with them. Okay, when they get there, in the communication that's sent back to the United States, they refer to these 3 men as Monsieur X, Monsieur Y, and Monsieur Z. Hence the name of this dilemma being the XYZ affair. What they tell the American ambassadors is, if you want an audience with Lord Talleyrand, the first thing you have to do is you have to give us $250,000 in a bribe, and that you give to us. But we can tell you this: once you get an audience with Lord Talleyrand, a treaty is going to cost you $12 million. Just point blank. The treaty's going to cost you $12 million because you have allied yourself with the British, is what the thing is. So, the Americans are outraged. Even the pro-French Republicans are shocked at this blatant outrage in attempt to extort funds from the United States. And even though John Adams had a desire not to start a conflict with the French, he's forced to go into what's referred to as the quasi-war with the France. We don't go to France to attack the French, but in the Caribbean, anytime we see a French pirate ship, it gets sunk. See, the way you play the pirate game is that you attack a ship, but you don't sink it. Because if you sink a ship, you can't get any of the stuff. But what the quasi-war is, whenever American ships see the French vessel, we sink it. We're not playing pirate games. It's a war. And we're going to put those ships on the bottom of the ocean. And we sink more than 100 French privateers in the Caribbean during this conflict. It's pandemonium in the Caribbean. You guys see all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. This is kind of what's going on here. I think not enough is made of the fact of how much piracy takes place in the early parts of our country's history. So this XYZ affair starts this whole quasi-war and is a real issue in the Adams administration. Now, part of the conflict now, especially for the Federalists, now they have reasons to, and the sort of a knee-jerk reactionary response to the French in this XYZ affair. They are going to pass what your text refers to as the Alien and Sedition Acts. It's 2 sets of laws, the Alien Acts and the Sedition Acts. Okay, we're going to discuss the 2 of them so that you get an understanding of what we're talking about. Right, take a look and see if any of these kinds of things would seem to violate any of the amendments in the Bill of Rights. The Sedition Act is a law that makes it illegal to utter false words against the government. It makes it illegal to utter false statements against the government. And who determines whether or not statements are false? The government. And so basically its primary target is Republican newspapers. When they are critical of the president's actions, when they're critical of the quasi-war, when they're critical of what's going on and how Adams has treated it, those Republican newspapers can be shut down under this legislation. And the second piece of legislation is called the Alien Acts. It's designed to discourage French people from coming to the country. It requires longer waiting periods for naturalization. It allows us to imprison and deport without trial any French citizen who's on our shores. It targets the pro-French Americans and discourages French from coming to our country. Now, again, does that seem to violate any of the amendments to the Constitution, those naturally held rights? Well, of course they do. Now, the two individuals, again, anti-federalists, who come are Jefferson and Madison. Jefferson and Madison are going to turn to the states. This is something that you need to understand. Madison helped to author. Madison authored the Constitution. When these two acts are published and passed by the Congress and signed by the President, both Jefferson and Madison believe that they are unconstitutional. They are unconstitutional. What they do is they turn to the state legislatures, right? And they write up what are called the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. What these resolutions say is that states can nullify unconstitutional laws within their jurisdictions. Okay, this is going to happen again in Andrew Jackson's administration. South Carolina is going to nullify a federal tariff. But I can give you a contemporary example. Let's see, a few years ago, the state of Colorado decided to make the recreational use of marijuana legal. Now, in Colorado, you can now go to a pot store and you can buy marijuana. So here's the question. Is it illegal to recreational use marijuana in the United States of America? Yes, it is. If federal agencies were to go into Colorado, the FBI, the DEA, the federal marshals, they could go into Colorado and they could start arresting people left and right because it is against federal law, right? Basically, what the Colorado law did was it nullified the federal law within its state's jurisdiction. Okay? The purpose of this action, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, was supposed to force a conflict between a state law and a federal law. Normally, the Constitution says federal law supersedes state laws, but this can force the legislation into the Supreme Court to where a decision can be made about the legitimacy of the law. Okay, that's the purpose. Andrew Jackson is going to take a different tact when he has to deal with this nullification crisis. And in the United States, when President Obama was the president and Colorado made marijuana, the recreational use of marijuana legal, nobody did anything. And so now a number of other states have passed legislation. So why doesn't the federal government shut down these areas? If it's still against federal law, why not? The problem may be the way that the federal law is worded. It classifies marijuana as a narcotic. And if it were to go before the Supreme Court, the case can be made, it is not a narcotic, so therefore it should not be illegal, and it would throw out the entire law. And so the federal government may be just trying to protect itself, but time will tell. Time will tell. The Alien and Sedition Acts were clearly unconstitutional. both Madison and Jefferson believed that in the kind of government that we had, in this kind of tiered jurisdictions, you have the national government, the state government, and the local governments. If a law can be considered unconstitutional at the state level, the states have a right to challenge the federal law within the court system. And I think that's what these these resolutions were designed to do. It will work eventually. Well, Adams is only going to serve one term as president, and following his term as president, Thomas Jefferson is going to be elected. Now, the big question becomes, so do we have political parties? Regardless of all their blustering and all their explanations and all the reasoning, clearly, we've got two clearly defined political parties. We've got Republicans and we've got Federalists. Both of them have different foreign policies. Both of them have different economic policies. Both of their systems seem to be able to work sufficiently within the confines of the Constitution. It's these two governing philosophies are going to be sort of at odds with each other in the country from this point on. So, in the next video, we will talk about Thomas Jefferson and look at his presidency and the primary crisis that he has to encounter.